Right from the early days, bad weather and poor visibility have always been the pilot's worst enemy. Before radar and GPS, all you had to steer you home was an altimeter, a compass, and the seat of your pants.
Many an intrepid aviator would have been doing this back in the day in conditions of fog, appalling low visibility. Many a guy fell victim with his passengers or his mail in the early days of navigation to terrible weather conditions. These early pioneers, the best they could hope for was what they call a flare pad, goosenecks of burning oil to light up the darkness and cut through the fog and through the low visibility.
The loneliest place in the world is flying around in the gloom with no idea of where your airfield is. And once you've found it, landing is still one of the most dangerous bits of flying, as I'm just about to find out.
And you can just see the lights now, just starting to glimmer. What a great sight if you were an old mail plane pilot to come in on a foggy day and have the goosenecks bringing him home. And we're coming up on the runway now. We're side-slipping into the wind, going crossways to it. On these aircraft, the visibility is so poor from the cockpit that you have to actually go sideways in the air to see through the front. Just crossing the runway threshold, and we're coming down now, descending through about 100 feet, through 50 feet, home at last. Runway 29, and the lights are running past. And that's touchdown.
Well, I wouldn't like to do that every day for real. But back in the day, people did that all the time. And a lot of people didn't make it.
In a 7-year period in the 1960s, 22 planes in the UK crashed on landing in poor weather conditions. So it was no surprise that the solution to landing in fog, the most dangerous condition, came from the land of the pea souper. In 1962, a British company came up with a plane light years ahead of the competition, a plane that could land itself in zero visibility. The Hawker Siddeley Trident. One of the first pilots to fly this pioneering aircraft was BEA's Tony Angus.
If you think about it, if you're landing in absolute limiting conditions, when I say limiting, I mean thick fog and a visibility of about 50 metres, you've got to do it by automatics because you cannot physically see enough to do it.
Imagine the terror of landing in fog, but at least a pilot felt in control. It must have taken some nerve to keep your hands off the controls in the new Autoland system, with the ground rapidly coming up to meet you. As the plane makes its final approach, 3 radio altimeters beneath the aircraft detect its height above the ground, and homing into a directional radio beam sent out from the runway, the Trident's Autoland would bring the plane safely down with no intervention from the pilots. Rocket science.
The system that we are using today to land airliners is, in essence, the same system that that was developed with the Trident.
That is absolutely right. That is absolutely right. The Trident was the pioneer, the forerunner, call it what have you.
I'd call it gobsmacking. The first Boeing with full blind autoland like the Trident was the plane I fly, the 757, and that was 20 years later. But no matter how good your autoland, it wouldn't deal with most of the factors involved in the single largest cause of air disaster: pilot error. Building safety into planes is paramount to any manufacturer. Boeing, who have built more passenger jets than any company on the planet, have established an excellent safety record. Less than 1 fatal crash per million flights. This, their 737, has one of the best safety records of any aircraft. 1,200 are in the air at any one time, and one takes off every 5.3 seconds. The Boeing 737 has been in continuous production for over 30 years. It is the world's best-selling airliner. Over 5,000 have been delivered, but they can't make them fast enough. There's a backlog of over 800 still waiting to be delivered. But for all of its success, if you look inside its guts, it's got a lot in common with the Tiger Moth. This aeroplane was designed in the 1960s, and in the 60s, of course, they still had cables connecting the pilot to the flight controls. In this case, the flight controls are actuated by cables but connected to hydraulics. Should the hydraulics fail, though, the pilot himself can physically move the controls with a lot of muscle power. But the 737 was the end of the line for airliners with manual control cables. The basic mechanics of these flight control systems would ultimately get in the way of more efficient and hopefully safer innovations. Innovations that would come from the other side of the pond. A European company, Airbus, had a vision, a new generation of digital aircraft. And the dream became a reality in 1987. They produced an aeroplane which would revolutionize the way that airlines thought and the way that pilots flew. This is it, the Airbus A320. Look, no hands. The flight controls on this aeroplane are signaled, yes, by wires, but not by cables, by electrical wires. By electrical signals, by digital electrical signals, because we are in the world's first production digital fly-by-wire aeroplane. And as well as increasing efficiency, Airbus believed computerized control systems could seriously reduce the chances of pilots crashing aeroplanes.